Hello everyone, welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Today must have been one of Palm's wedding, but ultimately a happy one for Donald Trump as he won the New Hampshire Republican presidential primary. It's a significant victory as he is now in a commanding position to eventually become the party's presidential candidate in November's election. Despite her loss, Nikki Haley has vowed to carry on, saying this race is far from over. Meanwhile, incumbent President Joe Biden won the Democratic primary in the same region, though he was not on the printed ballot. For more details, we invited Chris Casquejo, a correspondent at Voice of America, who is covering the news on the ground in New Hampshire. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Good to be with you.
All right, Chris, the election in New Hampshire was the second in a series of state-by-state contests, but the first primary. That being said, what significance does Trump's win here have?
Well, it shows that the Republican Party here in the U.S. is the party of Trump. It seems that voters cannot quit him. And let's take a look at some of the latest numbers. With 91% of the New Hampshire vote in, Trump is leading Nikki Haley by 11 percentage points. That was what polls were showing, that he would win this race by 10 to 20 points. And that's exactly what looks like it's going to happen. Now, Haley drew her support from groups that were distinct minorities in the GOP electorate. She beat Trump among primary participants who were undeclared. That means they were not registered as Democrats or Republicans, but they were able to vote in the Republican primary. Also, about half of her supporters were college graduates, and about half identified as moderates. Now, history is on Trump's side. Never before has a presidential candidate won the first two nominating contests without going on to win his party's nomination. Back to you.
All right, Chris. Now, we need to take a look at Haley's point of view as well. Even after a second straight defeat against Trump, the former governor of South Carolina has vowed to continue the fight. Now, could you tell us how Team Haley is seeing the race so far?
Well, they're vowing to continue on, even though calls are increasing for her to get out of the race. A lot of the Republican contenders who are running for president have closed ranks behind Donald Trump, including Tim Scott, who's a senator in Nikki Haley's home state of South Carolina, and she actually appointed Scott to his seat when she was the governor of South Carolina. Also, Ron DeSantis, who dropped out of the New Hampshire primary and the Republican presidential race over the weekend, has thrown his support behind Donald Trump, and so did Vivek Ramaswamy. So it appears that Republicans are closing ranks behind Nikki Haley, so she's going to face increasing pressure to get out of the race so the Republicans can get into general election mode against current incumbent President Joe Biden.
All right, I see. Now, so basically, Trump won key New Hampshire primary, and there is little doubt now about Trump's hold on the Republican nomination. However, as he looks ahead to the November election, he will have to confront legal difficulties. So, could you give us the latest on Trump's legal issues and how that situation is expected to unfold?
Well, he's facing a slew of legal issues, as you know. His free speech case against Georgia District Attorney Fani Willis is now cleared to go to the Supreme Court. The highest court in the land is already reviewing whether he's eligible on the ballot in Colorado and several other states. He is being sued by New York's Attorney General Letitia James, and he is criminally indicted in 4 separate cases, 2 in D.C., 1 in New York, and 1 in Georgia. These indictments include sets of 4 felony charges on accusations that Trump tried to overturn the 2020 election. Now, interestingly, in New Hampshire, about 42% of the voters who voted for Trump said that he is not fit for office should he be criminally convicted.
Right. Now, Chris, we have been talking about Republicans' primary, but on the same day, primary elections for Democrats also took place, and incumbent Biden did not feature in the race with no official delegates on the line. However, he still won the primary, right? What did the results suggest?
Well, this whole issue is the result of a spat between the Democratic Party and the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire has it written into its law that its primary is the first in the nation, but Democrats decided to change their primary calendar and have South Carolina be the first nominating primary for the Democrats, and that's happening next month. They argue that South Carolina has a much more diverse electorate, including many more black voters than there are here in New Hampshire. But Biden still cruised to a victory here in New Hampshire, gaining 70% of the vote at last check, even though no delegates will be awarded at the Democratic convention this summer.
Right, Biden still won. Now, Chris, lastly, I'd like to look at what key events for the 2024 U.S. presidential election remain. As far as I know, March 5th is a Super Tuesday, which is going to be a deal breaker for presidential candidate campaigns. Could you elaborate more on this?
Well, that's what Nikki Haley says that she wants to do. She wants to stay in the race until Super Tuesday and see what happens. But here's the reality for Nikki Haley. In her home state of South Carolina, which is on February 24th, she's trailing Trump by 30% in the polls. And in the Super Tuesday primaries in 16 states, she's also trailing by that substantial margin. So it looks like she has an uphill battle. And many observers thought that New Hampshire was her best chance to win a primary. And it looks, the race was called for Donald Trump last night. And the only question is how big his margin of victory is going to be here in New Hampshire.
All right. Well, we'll have to see how Haley, deals with uphill battle, like you just said. Now, these are all the questions I have for you, Chris. Thank you for your time.
Great to be with you.
All right. Although we still have to wait and see how the rest of the key events unfold, the 2024 U.S. presidential election is largely expected to be Trump versus incumbent Biden. And all eyes are on whether Trump will return to the White House and the possible impact if he wins. To discuss this, we invite Professor Chung Guyon from Gangwon National University. Welcome to the show, Professor Chung.
Thank you for having me today.
All right, Professor, first question. The last time Trump was behind the resolute desk, he was the man behind U.S. protectionism. And since there is slightly higher chance for Trump to return, all eyes are on the impact his return would have on the global economy and businesses. Could you tell us how it is expected to be?
Well, we have experienced the Trump administration already 8 years ago. As you remember, as he assuming the presidency in January 2017, former President Trump declared the withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, which was a multilateral free trade agreement involving 12 Asia-Pacific countries, which was made by Obama administrations. And that actually included United States and Japan, criticizing that it was against the interest of American workers. I think so the same policy and same attitude is highly likely, and all the Biden administration's accomplishment is likely to be canceled immediately as he assumed the Oval Office. Trump already has pledged the blanking of Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, and introduction of, as you mentioned, 10% universal basic tariff. And also Trump mentions about IPF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which Biden administration worked so hard to accomplish. So far, it has accomplished the practice of fair trade and clean economy. And now it is about to reach the trade agreement, which is the last step of the IPF. But as the former President Trump victory becomes a real likelihood, all the discussion has been suspended already.
All right,
so overall, it's very concerning that if Trump were to be reelected, not only about this protectionist policy, but the trade war, another trade war might unfold with this aggressive trade policy, not only against China, but also against Asian allies and partners like South Korea and Japan, which has significant trade surplus with the United States.
All right, I see. Very concerning indeed. Now, Professor Chung, regarding ties between the U.S. and North Korea, Trump has been boasting about his close relationship with the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un. If he returns, what diplomatic policy is he expected to take regarding North Korea? And will Pyongyang come to the table, negotiating table, that is, to talk if Trump returns?
Well, there was an article lately published that if Trump came into power, then it will hold another summit with North Korea and reach an arms control agreement immediately. But that article and argument has been denied by the Trump team. But I think that shows the basic attitude of the Trump team or Trump himself on North Korea. Not only he has a tendency of show off his capability to make a deal to the world, but at the same time, he will suggest a withdrawal of the U.S. forces out of the Korean Peninsula in return, as his isolation foreign policy orientation suggested. We already observed that. So in response to this gesture, North Korea might reciprocate with a positive attitude, I think, given the economic predicament and unstable regime security Kim Jong-un suffers at this moment. Summit with the United States and North Korea is a great opportunity to rally its domestic support. So series of this event might weaken the existing rock U.S. Allied posture and responses we have accomplished so far, and also extended deterrence as well. And as a result, I think public opinion calling for developing indigenous nuclear weapon might arise one more time in South Korea as well. So everything is very unfortunate at this time.
All right, I see. Now, Professor, that being said, in that case, what kind of provocations do you believe North Korea would stage, conducting 7th nuclear test before U.S. presidential election actually happens possible?
I think that is very likely, and that is actually likely all the time. And also, North Korea also conducted provocation today as well by launching a cruise missile. So I think this kind of provocation is very likely, not only against the United States, but also against South Korea as well, because Kim Jong-un recently mentions during his Congress party that criticizing kind of NLL kind of demarcation lines may not be protected. So any kind of provocation is very likely at this moment.
All right, I see. Now, Professor, let's also take a look at how U.S.-South Korea ties might be. You just already mentioned during Trump's time in office, he labeled Seoul as a free security rider and urged the South to sharply increase its share of defense costs. Might he feel the same way if he returns?
I think this issue is also very likely, unfortunately. And that's why South Korea and the United States are now attempting to pre-negotiate a new special measurement agreement, SMA, to minimize the impact on South Korea-U.S. alliances in case Trump returned to power. As you might remember, during the last SMA negotiation under the Trump administration, it was very difficult to compromise because the United States pressed for a significant increase in South Korea's contribution and criticizing South Korea as a free rider, as you just mentioned. So this negotiation lasted for a year and a half and actually leading to a period of uncertainty and potential agreement gap. So eventually this agreement was reached shortly after the change of administration in the United States with the Biden administration taking office. So I think this kind of situation is very likely. And this concern is not only about South Korea, but also about all the U.S. allies in Asia and also Europe as well.
All right. Well, Professor Chung, you already mentioned that we are pre-negotiating regarding the share of defense costs. But as we all know, there are so many areas and parts that we need to cooperate with the U.S. So that being said, in what kind of diplomatic strategy do you believe Seoul needs to take regarding the United States if Trump returns?
Well, I think we have to start from the start, I think. We worked so hard to kind of change our diplomatic stance and foreign policy and even regional strategies to better coordinate with the United States, especially under the US-China competitions. That was the situation when Biden administrations and Yoon Suk-yeol administration actually coordinate together for the last several years. But I think if Trump administration actually become the real possibility, then we might have to confront the U.S. administration with different worldview, which does not really respect rules-based orders or does not value liberal kind of democracy. And everything we have prioritized between U.S. and South Korea might be changed. So if that's the case, I think we have to coordinate immediately so that we can have much better places than in the case in the 8 years ago.
All right. Well, it's definitely going to be a tough call, Professor. Let's turn our eyes to Japan, Professor Chung. The Japanese government has reportedly reached out to Trump's team after concluding that he has a good chance of being reelected. Why such a preemptive move? And furthermore, what would Trump's return mean to the Trilateral alliance between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo?
Well, still, the President Biden still had a chance to win the election, I think. We have 48 states away. But as I just mentioned, if Trump wins, and equally same probability actually exists that Trump win the election in November. So reaching out to Trump team might be a rational choice for Japan as well. I think South Korea needs to reach out to Trump team if the primaries are moving toward the end and Trump is likely to win the elections in November. So as we have discussed, that the current U administration and Trump administration has huge differences in terms of foreign policy, security, and economy as well. So I think it is not a bad idea, but thing is, what we have just coordinate between South Korea and Japan might not be kind of sacrificed as it moves toward Trump administration. And regarding trilateral, well, during the previous Trump administrations, they also included this trilateral cooperation in its Indo-Pacific strategy in 2019. So it is not it's not a bad idea for Trump administration to have this trilateral cooperations. But the thing is that Trump administrations has been shows his dislikes about this multilateral cooperation. So in that sense, he might downplay the role and status of this trilateral cooperation. But equally likely, probability is that U.S. might put more burden sharings and more rules and more roles on trilateral so that it can play more offshore balancing strategy and Indo-Pacific strategy.
All right, Professor. Now, I believe this is the very last question. I'd like to tap on Washington's ties with Beijing. Many experts forecast no significant change in the relationship regardless of who becomes the U.S. president, saying the U.S. would continue with its de-risking policy against China. Is this really so?
Yeah, it is true that when it comes to China policy, Trump team has much more stronger stance actually than Biden administrations. Initially, Biden administration kind of set the relationship between two countries as a competitive coexistence, given that there is a long-term period of competition between two countries. But now it has been slightly changed that the United States is now in an upper hand. It is now beginning to dominate, beginning to kind of much better place than in the 4 years ago. But anyway, there is a competition or conflict is a kind of main assumptions and about two countries' relationship. But the differences is that more about Taiwan, I think. It's not about China, it's more about Taiwan. Biden administration actually perceives Taiwan Strait issue from geopolitical and geoeconomical perspective. So it attempted to reorganize the supply chain of semiconductor productions and criticize Chinese move, unilateral kind of changing status quo in the Taiwan Strait by using forces. So that was the basic stance of the Biden administration regarding Taiwan issue. But when it comes to this issue, Trump does not really perceive the value of Taiwan from the perspective of democracy as well as geopolitical kind of stance. He mainly concerns about this issue and perceive this issue from like a bilateral perspectives. He recently mentions that Taiwan took away all the semiconductor business from the United States. That's the kind of perspective about this Taiwan issue. And he also mentions we asked them more tariff when it comes to semiconductor businesses. So he's not having this geopolitical perspectives in terms of great power politics. He's more about this bilateral kind of relationship perspective. So that is actually concerning for regional countries and allies.
All right, I see. Well, approach to Taiwan would mainly differ. All right, Professor Chung. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.